Joining me now is Sky News contributor Kosha Gator. Kosha, we finally got that concession speech from Kamala Harris today.
Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up.
Oh, that might be bad news for the Democrats, Kosha. It sounds like she might want to run again.
She might, but I would have to say the odds of her succeeding are pretty close to zero. We can look at history. She has never won any competitive race because what she won in California isn't exactly competitive. She never got a single electoral vote in the primaries over here. And she raised $1 billion. She inherited about 25% of that from Biden. And then when the switcheroo happened, she raised another $700 million.
Incredible.
And she blew it all. She's reportedly at a $20 million deficit. So I don't think donors are going to ever decide to put $1 into her campaign again. They've got other candidates on the bench, and it's not going to be her.
That's part of this whole campaign that hasn't been talked about so much. I think there's been a little bit of attention from segments of the media of just how much bad press Donald Trump has got, how uneven that has been throughout the campaign. But the Democrats outspent the Republicans by a huge amount, 3-1, I think it was last month alone. And they still lost. They lost every swing state. That is an enormous failure.
Yeah, it's a big example of ROI. I think with Hillary versus Trump, it was the same thing, and this was even more. I think it was $300 million for Trump in money in the bank versus $1 billion, and we can see the results.
Now, the Democrats' talent pool is a little bit shallow. That's why we're thinking maybe Kamala will have another go of it. But then you look at the Republican side, they've got a wealth of talent, young talent. Ron DeSantis, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. You've got Vivek Ramaswamy, J.D. Vance, who's going to be vice president. Lots of young, smart, capable politicians.
I think that's been another gain out of this. And we always talk about how the Trumpism movement or MAGA or populism is bigger than Trump, and he's a vanguard of it. But the bench strength that has emerged, a lot of these breakout stars, they're 40 years or younger, some of them, and they really do embody that the mantra, the Trump brand of republicanism, which is completely remade the Republican Party of the Bush, Romney, McCain years. So it's definitely a deep bench strength, and it'll be very interesting to look at what 2028 looks like.
Now, there's already speculation as who's going to be included in Trump's cabinet. Preparations for the transition have already begun, led by Howard Lutnick and Linda McMahon, with the Trump MAGA Avengers, as they're called, acting as advisors. Here we're talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, J.D. Vance, Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. Kosha, that's a fairly solid core team there.
Avengers is a great name for it. You know, the overarching theme with Trump has been drain the swamp, and one of his biggest regrets that both his supporters noticed and he really accepted and admitted to in this campaign is the personnel decisions that he made in the first term. And it really does appear that he has learned his lesson around that and is going to be much more shrewd and savvy about who he brings in around him. He is this outside businessman, and all those names that you mentioned, most of them are outsiders, which will just bring a very different perspective. Whereas last time, he kind of fell into the tried and tested route of having much more Washington types in there, even though he did want to drain the swamp. So that's going to be interesting to see.
Well, that was his biggest failing in that first term. He allowed some people into that inner circle who he shouldn't have. And I think he's going to be far more cautious this time around. How is he going to manage to fill those crucial spots and still have people who are not going to turn on him like happened last time with a few, well, infamous names?
It's going to be interesting because I think there's something like 10,000 positions that have to be filled, and the cabinet requires Senate confirmation. The good news is, since Republicans are taking the Senate by a pretty healthy majority, it looks like, he should be able to confirm the types of people that he wants, hopefully, because that's one barrier to get over. And then the other thing we know is Trump is not shy about trial and error and firing people if things don't work out, and I would not be surprised if you do see some of that even in this term.
Oh, I think there's going to be a scorched earth policy in some parts. But yeah, let's hope he gets those core positions right. There's a speculation that Marco Rubio is a contender for Secretary of State, and the Trump campaign co-chair Susie Wiles and former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, former White House domestic policy advisor Brooke Rollins, all their names have been put up as possible chiefs of staff. Can you see that happening with, particularly with that crucial chief of staff position?
I think some of those names, like McCarthy, get people in Trump's world backed up a little bit, because there is this civil war between the establishment and the MAGA types, and there are some establishment people who are diehards. We know who they are. There are some who have had an evolution over to the MAGA side, but then the question is it genuine? Is it not genuine? I think all that is going to be hashed out. People might be disappointed with certain picks too. You're not going to get everything, but I think by and large, he is in a very strong position with this very decisive victory mandate, majorities to confirm things. And in general, I would expect to see the pendulum swinging a little bit more towards populism and away from establishment.
Now, Trump came close to turning the deep blue state of New York red. Came as close as a Republican has in recent times. New York will be a Democrat state for a long time. But he did have a big uptick, Kosha, in minority groups and support from minority groups. He doubled his support among Black voters in New York compared to 2020. He saw a big jump in Hispanic voters as well. This is a trend that is mirrored across a number of other states. And you look at other demographics, Asian Americans, big increase there. Mm-hmm. Young voters too, big increase there. What do you see as being behind this trend?
This is really dramatic, these shifts with all of it. And I think it comes down to three things: the message, the messaging, and the mechanics of how the campaign was run. His message has always resonated with groups because he grew from 16 to 20 with these groups, and even more now. Immigration, inflation, economy, all of that really hurts these groups more, actually disproportionately more than the more elite, wealthy, college-educated whites, which has been his weaker group compared to those. Messaging, something about his style, the straight-talking, plain-spokenness really resonates with those groups, I think, and the sort of the strong man, strong leader persona. And then the mechanics, where the ground game is just remarkable, the way he did that. He outsourced a lot of it to these outside groups rather than keeping it in-house, as it's typically done. And the way they turned out the vote with low propensity voters in those communities, in those groups, is something that I think the Republican Party is going to benefit from in multiple elections from here on out.
And the work he did in getting young men out to vote, because young men in particular, men in general, don't vote as much as women do in America. And if they did, the elections would be a landslide for the Republicans every time.
Absolutely. His podcast strategy, coupled with the Charlie Kirks of the world, doing the campus tours and signing up people, doing the hard grunt work of getting registrations, all of that just came together beautifully. And they figured out this formula that for some reason Bush, McCain, Romney just were never able to do. And this is a real structural advantage that they've created, which led Trump to the White House. And I think it's going to pay dividends in years to come.
And you look at some of the numbers he achieved, the reach he had doing that 3-hour sit down with Joe Rogan, which I thought was enormously risky at the time, because he looked to be doing well in the polls, and Joe Rogan, he was a Bernie Sanders man. He's certainly not a conservative in any sort of traditional sense. And there was so much risk in sitting down with him for a robust chat, but he did it. It has got such huge reach, and I think in the end, it's probably the most impactful bit of media he did. In the end, Rogan endorsed him, and it wasn't just Rogan. He spoke with a bunch of content creators, comics, just people who reach young audiences.
It was kind of the story arc of how he was adversarial against mainstream media. He coined the phrase fake news and made that a part of the vernacular. And then this, just the extension of that, the continuum of just not even dealing with mainstream media. I mean, he did what he had to do, but he went into this entire other genre. People who have far bigger audiences, 30, 40 million people are the listenership of Joe Rogan. Yeah. People that are not in the media bubble. And, he's able to bob and weave and riff and have these long form conversations.
And he's likable. If you actually watch the long form, if you're not just getting a tiny 10-second clip here and there, he is a very likable person when he's having a chat. He's funny, he pokes
Conversational.
fun at himself, he's good with the banter, and I think, again, that helps him. Before you go, the share market seems to be pretty happy with the Trump win. Wall Street's main indexes jumped to record highs, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average up almost 4% and the SP 500 jumping up more than 2%. It seems like, Kosha, the investors are looking forward to lower taxes, less regulation, some energy security.
Absolutely. The business-friendly backdrop that Republicans in general bring, but especially Trump, they know what he's done before, is one piece of it. And the other piece of it is, again, the victory being so decisive and taking all three branches, or both chambers of the House and the presidency, means that the uncertainty has been contained, and so there's less volatility than might have been the case if there were, fights back and forth and legal lawfare and all of that. So I think the markets are quite happy today.
Kosha Gadda, thank you so much for your time.